reminded myself. Yes, we are recording, so please be advised that we are recording this. If anybody has an objection, please let us know.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony, for the introduction. And Nathan and I are really glad to be presenting on the evaluation of user interactions and preferences of shared bicycle and pedestrian transit platforms today. Typically, in the past, when we presented at the conversations with colleagues, we've talked about counts, bicycle and pedestrian counts. But today, we're going to talk more about uh, understanding behavioral aspects. And so looking at surveys and technology, specifically video cameras, to understand how the different users are behaving at these shared platforms. Before I go ahead, just wanted to take a second to acknowledge the efforts of the other members on our team, Jennifer Doe, Chris Monsieur, Elizabeth Yates, and Julia Plots, who did great work as well. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of context for this study. So this study was centered on Outer Southeast Division Street in Portland. This is an arterial corridor and was categorized as a high crash corridor by the city. So it's pretty dangerous for walking, bicycling, and driving. So PBOT, which is the Portland Bureau of Transportation, launched the Outer Division Safety Project as a way to conduct some safety improvements and improve overall safety on this corridor. And as a part of that, TriMet, which is the Portland Metro Area's transit agency, also implemented the first BRT style bus line in Portland. So BRT stands for Bus Rapid Transit. And so this is part of the Division Transit Project. So as a part of this project, the whole corridor was reconfigured, but there were a number of high capacity buses that were added, specifically the FX2 buses. And with that, there was redesign of the bus stops. So here is the standard design of the bus stops that we were evaluating. On the left side is a rendering of the bus stop, and on the right side, you could see the actual picture of what it looks like from one of the stops in the corridor. So I point out a few design features that are specific to this bus stop. There are three different areas that we were focusing on. The first one is this area, which is where the passengers board and alight the bus. There is a truncated dome up here, and this is about 4 feet wide. There is this bike lane, which basically it comes up to the level of the shared platform. And so this is a new design. Typically, buses and bikes would be riding, the bicyclists would be riding in the street, and they would do this leapfrogging maneuver with buses when the buses need to access the bus stops. And so this design gets bicyclists out of the roadway, but here they have to share the space with the transit riders. So the third zone is this zone where the transit riders wait until the bus arrives. And there are a few different design elements that I wanted to just point out. The bike lane is about 3 feet wide in the standard design. It's obviously green. In color, there are crosswalk markings that you can see, and these align with the doors of the bus as it arrives for people to board and alight. The bicyclists are supposed to stop here behind the stop bar when a bus arrives and yield to the pedestrians, and then they can proceed once the lane is clear. Most of the stops that we evaluated had this design, but there was one stop which was managed by ODOT, and because of constraints around the area that was available and agency preferences, the design at that one bus stop was slightly different. There was a black bicycle lane as opposed to the green lane that you see here. The wording was different at that one stop. Instead of stop here for pedestrians, it says bike lane ends and then bike lane on the far side to indicate to the cyclist that the bike lane has resumed. And there is also this, I forgot to mention this TWSI or tactile warning strip indicators. These are placed here to help the visually impaired pedestrians know that there is a demarcation and that the zone is changing and they're entering into this different area. In the standard design, it was 6 inches. In that modified design, it was 12 inches. So the objectives of our study were specifically to understand how this new design is working for all users. So we're evaluating transit riders and bicyclists, whether there were any conflicts between the two user groups. And if there are conflicts, where are they occurring and what can we do to mitigate them? We were also interested in looking at behavior, specifically where transit riders are waiting. Are they waiting in the waiting area? Do they step out into the bike lane? Where are bicyclists waiting, or are they waiting at all when a bus arrives? So these are the kinds of questions that we were wanting to answer with our study here, with the overall goal of informing future transit stop designs. Next slide, yeah. Okay, so to conduct this research, we employed a mixed methods approach. The advantage of the mixed methods approach is that it consists of a number of different experiments, and each of the experiments is designed to answer or target one specific question. And so when we put all the results together, then we're able to get insights from these different sub-studies to understand our overall goals for the project. So the first method that or that I want to talk about is this ride along with visually impaired riders. So we partnered with the Portland chapter of the American Council for the Blind, and we did a ride along with between 5 and 10 visually impaired riders. And the objective of this experiment was to understand how members of the disability community experience the FX2 platforms. We also wanted to see how that experience could inform our data collection because this was done before our data collection started. The second experiment that we did was to collect video at different transit stops along this corridor. And we recorded 2 days of video at 8 locations. And the objective here was to understand pedestrian and cyclist behaviors at the shared transit platforms. And then we conducted transit rider surveys, so handed out surveys, both online and intercept surveys, to understand the riders' attitudes and perceptions regarding the new bus stop designs. And then from that surveys, we asked people about if they experienced any disabilities. And within that group, we selected about 5 people to conduct some in-depth interviews to get further thoughts and perspectives from that group. And then TriMet, the transit agency, also conducted interviews and surveys with their operators along the corridor. And the idea there was to explore bus operator perspectives. And so our goal with this project was to put together the findings from all these different methods to understand and get a holistic picture of what is happening at these platforms. Next slide. Just a quick overview of the timeline when this project was conducted. The FX2 service began in September of 2022. In March of 2023, we conducted this walkthrough and ride along with the visually impaired riders. We started collecting video data in June of 2023. Then that fall, we undertook a survey of transit riders and then conducted those interviews between October of 2023 and 2024. Okay, so with that, we'll transition into results, and I'll just talk through this slide and then hand it off to Nathan. As I mentioned before, we collected 2 days of data across 8 locations, and so we ended up reviewing 272 hours of video across all the locations. And from that video, we were able to observe close to 1,060 bike lane users observed, and of which 81% were bicyclists. And then 26% of these bicyclists were riding the wrong way. We were also able to categorize the bicycles and the different users observed. So we had standard bikes, we had cargo trailer or recumbent bikes. We also observed e-scooters, skateboards, and others. Okay, I'll stop there and hand it off to Nathan to walk us through the rest.
Great, thanks, Sarisha. As she mentioned, I'm going to go through some findings, and we pulled some sample clips from the video review, so I'll show those at a few points as well to kind of demonstrate some of what we were seeing and how we were working with it. So one of the first things that we wanted to do is to understand kind of the speeds of riders as they went through the platform locations, both to understand if there is any slowing going down, understand if there, when passengers are present, for example, or when buses are present. It also allowed us to look at the differences in speeds between the different types of users. So this was taken by marking a point at which they crossed that first white line as they entered the platform area, and then the white line on the far side, and then calculating the speed based on that. So not fully exact, but we felt like we got enough to get some pretty good numbers from riders that went across both of those lines. Not everyone did. Some people stopped, some people got on the bus. But of those that we were able to calculate the speeds, as you can see, the bikes were around 10 miles per hour. E-scooter riders were a little bit faster. Skateboards and cargo bikes and recumbents were slower. What we were not able to do here, and I welcome, I think there's a lot of areas for potential conversation as we shift into that mode. But the distinction between e-bikes and standard bikes, that has gotten harder in some ways to identify, operationally speed. Yes, that is one area, but they've started to look more and more the same. And we didn't feel like with the quality of the video that we had and that we were able to be certain on those distinctions. But so we do have the standard bike includes those that would be categorized as e-bikes if we were able to separate them out. Within those standard bikes, we also, as I mentioned, wanted to look at some of this, how the speed changes depending on the context of who is in that space. So the highest speeds were when there was nobody present, so close to 11 miles an hour. When passengers were present, and particularly when buses were present at that platform location, and this was whether the bus was in the process of arriving, stopped, or departing, would qualify for these, but dropped down to about 8 miles an hour, which I think is a positive metric. It's not. We'll get into the design of are the bicyclists actually stopping at that ramp and where the stop bar is. We'll get into that, but in terms of the speeds, they are slower when there are buses and pedestrians present. So to shift into another question, and this is a basic objective of the platform design, was to get bicyclists out of the roadway so that they're not as Sarisha mentioned, doing the leapfrogging behavior or going out into traffic in a way that puts the bicyclists or other road users at risk. So a key thing to note there, if you look at that orange bar on the right, was only about 2 to 3%, and this is of bicyclists were riding with traffic, were riding and went out into the traffic lane rather than staying up on the sidewalk, or in some cases you see people moving into the multiple, including the bike lane, the black category there. So that would be moving from the bike lane into the sidewalk, for example, or the waiting area. A fair number were in that waiting area, 26 to 28%. Part of that is that there are a few things going on, and this is only bicyclists riding with traffic. Those that were riding against traffic, and as Sarisha mentioned, that was around 25% of the bicyclists that we observed. A lot of them were on the sidewalk the entire time. They, I think, didn't feel comfortable being in the bike lane. This is an area of East Portland where there's not as much of a, not the bike culture that we see in downtown Portland, where people necessarily feel welcome in using the standard bicycle infrastructure. It's a little bit of a lower income, more diverse area. But I guess the other thing to note here is that this difference of when passengers were present, and this is that second bullet there, they're more likely to leave the bike lane in that situation. The examples of that we saw were often bicyclists moving around pedestrians or transit riders that were waiting somewhere on the platform, sometimes in the bike lane, sometimes just closer to the bike lane, so they chose to go around them. The other thing I would note here is that because we see the bicyclists moving frequently and relatively comfortably between the bike lane and the sidewalk area, it doesn't appear as if those tactical marking barriers are a danger or a barrier to the bicyclist necessarily. They're pretty freely moving across those areas. So to show one example of that, I have a video clip here, and let me see if I can get this to start. You'll see this pedestrian transit riders waiting in the bike lane. I will get to that in a minute. We actually, for the most part, people stayed out of that area. This person saw a bus coming, was waiting to board, and a bicyclist is approaching. So the bicyclist moves comfortably into that sidewalk area. The transit rider gets ready to board the bus. Pretty smooth interaction, but again, that accounts for some of that behavior of bicyclists not staying in the bike lane. Sometimes the path was more complicated than that and involved leaving the bike lane, then entering the waiting area, then back into the bike lane. But again, more often as a safety measure or a way to avoid an interaction as anything else. And then that question of, are bicyclists stopping at that bike ramp? So anytime that a bicyclist approached and a pedestrian was present in this platform area, we coded their behavior, and this is stopping at the bike ramp was fairly straightforward. Our video review team was very easy. It was easy to see if that happened. The slowing in this case is in the perception of that reviewer, indicating that they saw, okay, as they approached and got up onto the ramp, they noticeably slowed. So 9% of the bicyclists actually stopped at the ramp and at that stop bar. 33% slowed as they went through that platform area. That's again a noticeable slowing. So a couple of thoughts here. One is if the design clearly indicates, well, stop for pedestrians in the crosswalk. I think there is something to be left to interpretation as to when exactly would a reasonable bicyclist think that's only when there's a bus present, or how to interpret that. I think there's some measure of interpretation required there. But If you're saying that the only success of the design is if all if all bicyclists come to a complete stop at that location, clearly not successful, only 1 in 10. But they are slowing and moving through the area. So I think that there's a discussion that I would welcome here about how to interpret these sorts of shared spaces and success in the design. We felt, and we'll get to this at the end, but that for the most part, the interactions were negotiated and relatively slow, and for the most part, not presenting a risk to pedestrians, but it is something that is, I think, an interesting discussion and needs some further thought, particularly as this sort of design or other designs move to busier areas with more pedestrians, more bicyclists, and more opportunities for interaction. So here I did pull an example of a bicyclist stopping at the ramp, and so we get to see when it works as it's supposed to, or as that design intends, we get to see what that looks like. Okay, the bicyclist approaches, riders get on, and the bicyclist proceeds. A quick note on the video quality here. This is zoomed in. I think the last one was as well. And so that's why it's a little bit grainier than it would be if we were watching it on a full screen or on normal resolution. So, but this was kind of to focus in on that area of interest. So the next area that we wanted to look at was what are the transit riders or pedestrians doing at these platform locations. And we saw really good compliance amongst transit riders with the kind of design intentions here. So that white line indicating where the transit riders should wait behind. We found that only 8% of the transit riders moved into the bike lane prior to the bus arriving and stayed there for more than 10 seconds. So we had a measure of the total amount of time that they waited in the waiting area, and then alternatively in the bike lane or in that boarding platform area. And with the understanding that oftentimes people will step out and look and then step back, and that wouldn't, we don't think, be a problem or against kind of what the objective is here, but not wanting passengers or people waiting for the bus to hang out in that bike lane area. We didn't see much indication that that was happening. In terms of boarding behavior, the vast majority, so 3/4, waited until the bus was actually stopped at the platform before crossing that white line and entering the bike lane through those crosswalks and into the boarding area. About another 15 or 20% crossed that line as the bus was slowing and arriving. So again, very high compliance with the kind of what I'd say the design intention is for transit passengers at these locations. And I didn't pull the beginning of that last clip with the transit rider waiting in the bike lane. But again, them moving out as the bus is approaching, it was, you saw that sometimes, but it was not a relatively common behavior. So now another issue is kind of, to the heart of the matter, I suppose, is the safety and potential conflicts at these locations. So all of those 1,059 bicyclists and other micromobility users that Suresh mentioned at the beginning, we looked for any situations in which there was some sort of an interaction with a transit rider, pedestrian, wheelchair user, anybody using that platform for transit or as a pedestrian. And we marked each of those, the video reviewers did. Suresh and I both went back then and together viewed 41 such interactions where either the pedestrian or the bicyclist or micromobility user reacted to the other user. So it took some sort of precautionary or evasive maneuver. And then we sought to identify any of those in which some measure of change of speed or direction was necessary to avoid a collision. For the most part, so 39 of those 41 interactions that we reviewed we deemed them to be kind of negotiating space or anticipatory changes of direction or speed. So not things that were at the point of like, oh, this if somebody didn't do something relatively soon, there could have been a collision. We did, as it notes here, find two what we deemed to be minor conflicts where some action was taken to avoid a collision. One was a passenger disembarking and a bike in the bike lane, and then another one was with a pedestrian and a wrong way bicyclist. We did pull clips of those two interactions so you can take a look. The first one is that pedestrians disembarking, you'll see somebody with like a wagon that and then a bicyclist passing through. Note on this video that it is the speed is faster than 1-to-1, so it's a couple of seconds per second. So if it looks a little odd, it's just that it's a little sped up. But here's that interaction. So they start to move out into the bike lane. The cyclist kind of sees that and moves, and again, maybe borderline precautionary. But we thought, okay, it looked like they saw each other sort of late and had to make a precautionary or a minor move to avoid a conflict. Again, I welcome conversation here about the kind of the definitions of conflict, and it's something that we've been working with over the years, but it's never easy to, and I think particularly this area of what is precautionary or anticipatory versus getting closer to a conflict or near crash. The other conflict clip that we noted as a minor conflict, you'll see this one is I think more comfortably a conflict. Here comes a cyclist going the wrong way and a last minute stop to avoid and then continue on. Again, that video is a little bit faster, about 2 or 3 seconds to 1. So again, that was rated as a minor conflict. I have a couple more clips that I want to go through that we deemed to be not conflicts, but just to give you a sense of some of those sorts of interactions that we were looking at. The bicyclist is coming on the sidewalk here, and there's a couple of people waiting for the bus, and so you'll see that interaction. The pedestrian doesn't see the bicyclist until the last minute or even until they're almost past, and then steps back. And then one more, again, we rated this as not a conflict, but I will let you watch. Again, someone approaching on the sidewalk, and again, that was a behavior that we saw a lot here. So slowly moving around. That one is real time. So again, that fell more into this negotiation for space, not that everyone is necessarily doing everything that they're supposed to be doing, but that in that shared space environment, it seems to be working relatively well. We then did, as Srisha mentioned, this survey of transit riders. And we did this in a couple ways. One was an email listserv that TriMet, the transit agency, has of people that had expressed interest or in updates on the FX2 line. So, and then we also asked them if they, in particular, have used these specific stops. And so these are for respondents that have used these stops. About half of the respondents also were intercept respondents, and you could see the postcards that we handed people, and we also had a version of the survey that they could take in person at those locations. As you can see, relatively positive perceptions. So a half agreed that bicyclists travel at safe speeds through these locations. 22% disagreed, so not unanimous, and the rest were kind of ambivalent on that question. Bicyclists are careful to avoid passengers. About half agreed, and a similar 22% disagreed. I think it's hard to get full agreement on anything, and obviously people come to it from different experiences. And one thing that we would note is that for visually impaired riders, and this comes from both the survey and particularly from the interviews and the ride along, is that they don't always know when bicyclists are approaching. And especially when it says there are loud buses in the vicinity, but there could be other loud traffic, makes it harder to identify kind of the auditory cues that there is a bicyclist approaching. Let's see. So just to move into the key findings, and I'll go through this quickly because I want to open it up to discussion. But as I've kind of mentioned a few times, given what we saw, and I emphasized the volume observed, these were relatively low bike volume locations and not very busy transit locations. But given those volumes, they seem to be managing their interactions pretty well. The bike lane users, as we noted, were not going into the travel lane, so taking away that risk to bike users. But on the other hand, rarely stop for pedestrians, although they do slow and navigate around them. The transit passengers, as we noted, have that high level of compliance of kind of using the design intention there. On the kind of limitations or challenges side, wrong way riders may pose challenges to these design intentions. And in this particular case, the signage indicating where to ride or where to stop was positioned for people going the right way in the bike lane. And so how people that are not doing that interpret that signage is a challenge. And then just to note that this shared design places extra burden on visually impaired individuals. We did have some measures to try to get some feedback from this community in this project, although the focus of this research was on people that actually use these facilities. And if people are being dissuaded or just from using them, or not comfortable riding transit or interacting with bike lane users, for example, they may not be out there, and maybe we didn't hear from people because of that. So that is, I think, a future need, and I know that something that there's some ongoing projects to try to get at and better understand shared facilities in these kinds of contexts. So that is the end of our slides. I'll leave the links to download the report or the TRR paper up for a moment, but I think I'd like to stop the share in a minute and see people's faces and let's jump into the conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you, Surisha and Nathan. Yeah, what a exciting study this was. It brings to mind so many. Whenever we're working, and I think almost everybody's probably in some ways here involved with working with protected bicycle networks or low stress bicycle networks in their communities. And as we're doing this, some of these innovative practices, particularly these interactions with transit, are really a difficult design and innovation. And the shared platform, I think, is a particularly tricky situation. Is the preference, all things ideal, would be to go around the platform, although there's circuitousness there. I'm going to remind everybody. I know I'm going to have Nathan in a few seconds go through and comb the chat here for some of the questions that come up that may not have been answered or that we want to bring to the larger group. I'll also remind people, if you'd like to have your cameras on, please do. It's good to see some faces. And also, if you have a question or would like to make a comment, you can use the chat box or also raise your hand, and I'll ask both Surisha and both Nathans to keep an eye on folks so we can call on you. But I guess one thing I'll start off a question, thinking about when you develop the framework for this and then doing the video observation, how much of the observation was sort of set up before you did the video? You sort of said, here's the questions, the sort of data points that we know we want to collect for this, versus then once you actually collect all the, what did you say, 172 hours of data, how much of this is what you see in the data and you sort of have to then on the fly figure out how to start classifying things that are unanticipated in those environments? And how did you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we set the video up so that the objective was to understand interactions of the video specifically, interactions between transit riders and bicyclists. So just to see anytime they interact, I think you could see from some of the quality of the videos that understandings, a lot of, especially in the shared space, I think when we say, okay, it looks like they were anticipating each other or negotiating for space, I think you need to see the interaction, the visual interaction, or the way that they are communicating to really understand if that's happening, or if because we can only take so much from the video, and so there are times where we're like, okay, it looks like they saw each other, it looks like they reacted to each other well ahead of time. We don't always know that that's the case. So that's a limitation, but yeah, I think in general it was. So yeah, the main overview, we knew what we wanted to get at. Some of the specific measures, we kind of, as we were reviewing the video, we thought, okay, it would be really helpful if we could gather the speed data, for example, and pull that in, and some other measures. But Suresh, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think one thing to note is we did do a round of data, video data collection early on in spring. And unfortunately, what happened was during the second day of the data collection, TriMet switched the buses from FX2 to the regular buses. So we couldn't analyze that data. But what it did show us was, some of the stops where we had what we originally had in the sample, they were not working out. So we ended up choosing, other stops in our final sample. So I think to add on to what you asked, Tony, I think there's a bit of a balance, right? You do go with like a preconceived notion of like, these are the set of metrics, these are the questions I want to answer, but then you also have to adapt on the fly because in reality, like everybody doesn't always stay in the bike lane or doesn't always stay, in the waiting area. They do this jog, and so you have to come up with some kind of rules on like, okay, as Nathan said, if it's more than 10 seconds of people waiting in the bike lane, that's when we coded. So yeah, there is a bit of adaptation that we have to do.
Yeah, quite a challenge, and I think Nathan, you even mentioned too there that sort of difficulty of making a difference between compliant behavior versus safety issues, because you want to log all that, but a lot of times some things will not work the way we intended. But if they're still working, perhaps we go with that and understand. At the same time, maybe we look at how to tweak the designs or do some of the things to help get desired behaviors. I see Amy Ingalls with MBTA. You have your hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself and join us? It looks like you keep muting, unmuting. It won't let you unmute. Let me.
There it
Try
is.
now.
Sorry. Still getting used to this headphone thing. Yeah, I was just curious. So I didn't miss it in the beginning, but I was curious what the widths of the different sections are.
Oh yeah, the dimensions
Self.
for those
Yeah.
platforms.
Yeah, I believe in the standard design, and Nathan, correct me if I'm wrong. Where the riders boarded and alighted, that was 4 feet. The bike lane was 3 feet, and I don't think we had the width of the waiting area, or maybe it was in the picture. That I don't remember.
So the waiting area typically was 9 feet.
9 feet. Okay.
Got it. Okay. 439. Okay. Thank you.
Good. And then I'll remind folks that Nathan Hicks has put in the link to the project website in the chat there, so look for that. And then I think Nathan, you just also put the TRR link. So if you're interested in some of this, folks, be sure to look in the chat site. Nathan Hicks, did you come through? Are there any questions? I haven't been able to look through all the chat. Anything that you want to?
Yeah, there's a few questions that are still in the chat. I do see, Suresh, you've been going through and answering a few of them. So I'll just look at the ones that are still outstanding. There was a question from Lauren, and as an aside, if you want to unmute and ask the question, you're more than welcome to. There is a question from Lauren, and it was, did you observe passengers with wheelchairs boarding or alighting the buses?
Yes, we did, and not a huge proportion, but we did. So for the review of transit passengers, we chose the hours of 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. to do that review, in part because working with TriMet, we had identified that was when they had the greatest number of lifts, or I guess kneeling. Your transit folks can tell me the right way to call it, but essentially that the ramp had been deployed, and so it felt like that would be the opportunity to capture the behavior of wheelchair riders. We also included the several locations that had the greatest proportion of those as one of our kind of criteria for selecting the locations that we videoed.
Did you
We didn't see particular
conflicts or issues?
challenges with those. Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, we didn't see any particular challenges or interactions that were different with those users than for other users. So they were, again, sometimes waiting in the bike lane, or bicyclists were maneuvering around them, but it was fairly consistent with what we saw with other riders.
And I realized I didn't write this down, just another comment since I'm unmuted, or question. You observed about, what did you say, 1,000 people?
1,059. That includes bicyclists, scooter riders,
Passengers.
skateboarders as well. So
that also includes the passengers, right? It's like
the passenger. Oh yeah, so the passengers, it was also around 1,000. I forget the exact.
So a total of 2,000 individuals or observations. Okay.
Yep.
And of that, what percentage did you say you actually observed a scooter rider or a bicyclist passing through a stop when there was a customer there? Did you do that?
Yeah. Let's see. So that is in the paper and in the report. It was a relatively low proportion of that 1,000, as maybe with a pedestrian present, it was, I think, several hundred of the 1,000.
Okay. We collected some video recently on a major transit corridor that has low bike ridership in our county, and it was similar numbers of people that we observed, and I think there was like 16 times we actually observed a situation where a bicyclist traveled through a bus stop when there was someone waiting there. Or no, it was a bus and bike interaction, only 16 times, where the bus and the bike were at the platform at the same time.
Yeah, so
really low.
More than that, but it is, it did make, particularly, as you say, with a bus and a bike and a transit rider at the platform, that was relatively rare. I mean, there was maybe 40 instances, so that it does narrow down as you get to that point. And I think that's a challenge.
In the chat, that was a challenge. That just sort of the low volume areas, it's harder to get the number of interactions that you want to see. It also will lead you to, I think, wonder if this type of application might be much more complex or much more troublesome in high volume locations where maybe you wouldn't perhaps use a mixed zone, just like you wouldn't use a mixed multi-use path on high volume locations. Pedram, I see you have your hand up. Is there something you'd like to join and add?
No, I have a question about the, first of all, thank you so much. This is a great presentation. And I have a question about that speed data that were shared. Surisha mentioned that it was an estimate for the bikes, scooters, e-bikes as well. So I'm a little bit confused. How did you do that? Because you showed the very exact amount for the speed for each one of these categories, and I am a little bit confused. How was that collected or estimated?
Yeah, so Actually, let me pull up a slide or two so that maybe I can explain this a little better. One moment. Okay, so this is again what the platform looked like. So at the beginning of the platform, there was this line that was where the platform ended and where the stop bar was, and then at the far end of the line was this white. At the platform was this white line to note the boarding location. So as the bicyclist passed this first line, we paused, and the video, which was I want to say it was 30 frames per second. And so the moment at which the front tire passed over this line, we marked that time. And then at the moment that it passed over this front line, we marked that time and calculated the speed based on that. So not exact, but giving us a rough ballpark of the speed of each user, and then the numbers that you referred to there, which are here, were just the average across those. So you're right, there's imprecision, or I think what you're alluding to is that there's imprecision. It's a rough estimate, but it allows us to see some of these differences.
Although the comparisons should be, the arrow would be the same across everything. So at least the comparison, I think, seems valid.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you
saw
so
one
much.
other question. Sorry, or did you want to? Well, I saw one other question in the chat. Maybe I'll go ahead and answer that. It was, why were there so many wrong way cyclists? This gets back to a couple of things. One, I mentioned it being in East Portland and kind of where there's less of an established kind of bike culture of, I don't know, rule following, if you will. But it's also a location where in that shot that Sarisha showed at the beginning of the presentation of the wide avenue without a lot of crossing opportunities, and the sort of location where bicyclists would be just as happy to stay on the side of the road that they're on and ride the wrong way rather than trying to cross with what has been traditionally a very dangerous street and is a very wide street. And particularly if your destination is on the south side of Division, why would you cross? And I think that's a mentality that has been there and continues. So I think that's part of it. So yeah, but there clearly is a lot of wrong way riding, and is a challenge that needs to be considered.
I just want to add on that, yeah, there is a bike lane on the other side too. So there's similar facilities. So it was not due to lack of facilities, but as Nathan said, high crash corridor, lack of crossings, heavy traffic. And so, yeah. I think Alexander.
And I see.
Yeah.
And I see, Alexander, you have your hand up if you would like to
Yeah.
go ahead and unmute.
Hi. This is really interesting. You'll see there's a bunch of people from the MBTA on here because we've been dealing with a lot of questions around designs like this. So this is really fascinating to see it broken out this way. I'm curious to hear from you what kind of feedback you specifically heard from the blind testers. I think from our perspective, as transit operator in many cities that are sort of doing their own independent thing in terms of bike lanes, has been trying to bring some harmony of design and some consistency of design. That seems to be like the really big feedback from blind users that we've done testing with, is like, I just want to know, and I want it to be predictable, and I want it to be consistent. I'm curious if you heard other things from the blind testers in particular about the designs and the things that would make it less maybe anxiety inducing or more intelligible or something for them, because I think that's sort of where we've focused most of our energy is on like is targeting sort of like the feedback we're getting from that community in particular as the one that is disproportionately impacted by these designs. And I would love to hear any like additional information you all have from that group in particular.
One thing I would point you to, so in the report that is linked in the chat, there's an appendix C, which is details from the ride-alongs and interviews, and goes in, because it wasn't a lot of people, it's kind of more, it's more, clearly more qualitative. But we do go through quite a few different issues of what we heard on various, types of concerns and design issues. Inconsistency was one of the challenges that people felt, and because this design was at the time a one-off. The transit agency does plan to do more of these. It's a modified BRT that they're calling it the FX was FX Express. I forget what the F is. Fixed Express. So that's a challenge. We also heard from the low vision community about a number of the design issues that they were concerned about. So at one of the locations that had the black bike lane and the blue tactical barrier separating the bike lane from the waiting area, we heard that like the blue was preferred. It was easier to see compared to the white at the other locations. The width was preferred. So it was a 12-inch barrier as opposed to a 6-inch barrier. So greater width, greater contrast in those. The green bike lane was preferred as the color of the lane just because it stood out more as something distinct and where they would expect bikes, again, thinking about the low vision community. A lot of concerns about the auditory side of it and being able to hear a bicyclist approaching. And we heard some suggestions for could the bus, could there be some sort of a warning system to identify approaching cyclists? Something that I don't know. I know there's some engineers on the call. I would be interested to hear about the kind of the state of the art and the potential for that sort of a system. But so there, and again, more in the report. But it's certainly these designs were a concern to that community and one that merits more attention.
All right, well, bear with me, everyone. I've lost my screen altogether, but it is 1:56. Hold on, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get. Yeah, I can't see anybody. I can still hear everybody.
Well, I'll just say, if folks want to reach out to us, we're more than happy to continue, conversation over email or separately. And so, Roy, you're saying that the paper is restricted access. Let me, I'll drop a link. We have an accepted manuscript version that I can share as there too. If I don't get it in time, feel free to reach out.
And then I will pull up here. Now I've got my screen back. I had a little glitch going on. Yes, as first of all, it's coming up the top of the hour here, so I just want to thank our presenters, Nathan and Sarisha. Really appreciate. This has been a great conversation today. I also want to remind folks there, a few of the links there are in the chat box. Also be aware if you're attending this, you're probably getting the emails for this, but our next quarterly meeting for the new Active Transportation Data Working Group is going to be November 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So look for that. You can find more information or inquire about that by contacting Kristen Nordback, and her email's right there. Or also visiting the site, which if you're at the old TRB Bike Ped Data Committee, it's the same link address. It's just an updated name for that. And so with that, I will thank everybody for joining us today, and remind you to check your email. I should also say, I'm sorry, for folks that responded to the survey that came out for the new committee a few months ago. We did take a lot of people who were interested in volunteering, and a number of you may have expressed interest in being part of the Conversation with Colleagues group. We will be convening those folks interested for an orientation before the end of the year. So if that's if that was one of the things you checked in that survey, watch for an email from our listserv that will invite you to that meeting. And then I will remind you, we will be setting up our calendar for 2026, where we'll plan to have quarterly series, generally at this same time. And so please let us know if you have ideas or there's things you're working on that you're interested in presenting, reach out to us. We love to have these conversations. So with that, if there's any last comments from our presenters.
I just say I dropped the accepted manuscript into the chat there, so if anybody wants to download that quickly before we finish up.
Excellent. I guess we'll leave it open for a minute for people to grab that. And thanks, everybody. We hope to see you at the meeting in November and in 2026 at the next conversation with colleagues.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. This has been fun.